Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in today. On behalf of the University of California, San Francisco Alumni Association, the UCSF Department of Psychiatry, the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, the MindScience Institute, and the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation, welcome to the 9th webcast of our series titled Emotional Well-Being During the COVID-19 Crisis for Healthcare Providers. This week's topic is Relationships Under Shelter, Transforming Conflict to Harmony. I will now turn it over to our host, Dr. Alyssa Apple.
Hey everyone, welcome. So happy to be with you on our second to last webinar. Today, before I bring in Esther Perel, I want to introduce you to our mystery guest for this week. So I have brought to you Dr. Ethan Weiss. Welcome, Ethan. Ethan is an associate professor of medicine at UCSF. He is one of our favorite doctors. He studies a broad range of aspects of cardiovascular health, from basic science to clinical science. He studies nutrition, different types of diet and fasting. And, you know, I go to Ethan when I want comments on a range of medical issues because he's extremely integrative thinker, very balanced and well-rounded. Good to see you, Ethan.
Very good to see you.
Welcome
back.
Thank
you. Thank you.
So Ethan has just come back from a month at Cornell Presbyterian Hospital, and I wanted to hear about what this experience was like for him, of course, with a focus on coping and his thoughts about COVID and how we're treating it, how we're treating physicians, how we're treating this disease, and how we're just looking at life, the process of dying, these conversations about dying. So we'll have a few minutes to talk with Ethan. I just want to say that you may have seen him recently. To his dismay, as he boarded the United Airlines on his way home from New York, the airplane was packed, and they were told, their expectations were violated. They were told the middle seats were going to be open. So he took an unhappy picture of himself, and to his dismay, it went to every major media outlet, and he had to hide from media as he got off the plane. He has not talked to anyone. That was not the welcome back he wanted. He doesn't seek that type of attention, but it did, I think, brought a good policy and more awareness to this issue. So hopefully you've recovered from that. Well, tell us a bit about what your month was like.
Well, it was 2 weeks, so it wasn't a month. Okay. But we could go anywhere, right? I mean, from sort of my thinking about why I wanted to go, and then acting on that, and then the experiences there. Do you want to start with the?
Let's start with your intention to go. And I know that's it's an extremely mixed, brave thing to do, and that everyone also, Sanjay told us, all the group of doctors decided they might die. Like this might be their last chapter, and I can't imagine what that's like. But I know you guys went through a lot, and I also want to mention, you'd mentioned to me guilt at not being a frontline provider, at having the same lifestyle while you see your colleagues struggle. And guilt has been such an important theme in the last few months for so many people sheltered in place or clinicians who can't serve right now. So yeah, tell us what that was like for you.
Right, well, that's a great way to introduce it. So I had actually agreed to cover for a colleague of mine who was advised by their physician not to come to the hospital back in middle of March. So right around March 16th, I think, which was when shelter in place happened here in the Bay Area, I went into the hospital. And I went into the hospital that week expecting there to be a surge here and expecting mayhem. And I think I probably got geared up for that. And I don't know, I use the term activated. I was definitely excited. I was not really afraid. I don't know if I was just dumb, but I certainly didn't consciously, I wasn't aware of any fear of dying. It's going to sound like a strange term, but I was excited. And then obviously the surge never came. And so, later on in the month of March, early April, I started to ask can we be more useful to people somewhere else? We're sitting around here twiddling our thumbs, having Zoom meetings 14 times a day, arguing about stupid things on Twitter, drinking ourselves silly, and can we do something productive. And so I did voice that. I asked out loud, hey, is there a chance we can go help? And I was told initially no. And then I only found out that UCSF was sending a group when everyone else did on one of the town hall calls on a Friday afternoon, that they were all going to go the following day. And you mentioned guilt. I had guilt and I had jealousy. I was extremely jealous, and I was guilty that I was not able to join them, and I was not able to help out my colleagues in New York. So, but all of the above: guilt, jealousy. Any other good emotions I can throw in?
Just the mix and just the fact that you're identifying the range of complexity is a new practice we all need to do. And Esther and I will be talking about that. We're in very complex territory with different roles, particularly healthcare providers, but all of us in our relationships. So tell me about how you were with a lot of people in their last days of life and their families. And I'm just wondering, you've been trained here at UCSF, and there's a culture of death where we can celebrate end of life, and there's planning, and there's a stage of hospice often, or some type of transition. And this was not at all the case now with COVID, and not your experience. And I'm just wondering how this has been affecting how you think about the process of dying, and what kind of conversations you've had for yourself and your family.
Yeah, we do have a very different way of thinking about things. I've now learned that there are dramatic cultural differences between the way things are approached at the end of life here versus in other places in the country like New York. New York has a very different way of thinking about things. My initial instinct when I got there was, I don't want any part of this. It's horrible. These people are suffering a fate that you wouldn't wish on anyone. Their bodies are ravaged. They're falling apart. They're dehumanized. This is going to sound really horrible, but I kept referring to them as farm animals. They couldn't talk. They were intubated. It was really impossible to connect with them on any real human way. And yeah. I thought, initially that first week, I don't want anything to do with this. And in fact, we would, go on socially distanced walks with a group of us and talk about things, more morbid things like, what would you do? And that first week, my response was, give me 24 or 48 hours on that ventilator, but then just let me go. I have since come to evolve in my thinking a little bit, and I can understand a little bit of sort of why this is so difficult. And I think partly it's because the playbook isn't known, right? If somebody is dying of heart failure or cancer, we understand what that looks like. We can predict with some degree of, not 100% certainty, but we understand what the process looks like. And so I think we can begin to help families and help patients embrace this process in a positive way. And I think what's happened here in San Francisco over the past 25 years with end-of-life care is spectacular. But I don't think it's as easy to apply to a novel disease where we don't understand what's going on. We can't predict who's going to get better and who's not going to get better. And we're stuck with this horrible situation where we can't communicate with our patients, and their families can't be there to communicate with us directly and face-to-face. And the best we can do is talk to them on the telephone. So it's a very difficult position. And I'll say, just to kind of wrap this up, I think I'm probably a little bit more open to, again, God forbid, if I got really sick, I think I'd probably want to give it more of a shot than just 2 days. So that's evolved.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Sanjay talked about is just these conversations about death and how we die, not fearing death itself, but how we die, and thinking about how much time, do we want a DNR or DNI order? How much time do we want on a ventilator? This year it's a ventilator. We don't know what other, hopefully not a lot of other terrible unknown diseases, but it's something we need to grapple with as a society, since it's not just going to go away. So looking ahead, Ethan, what advice do you have, given that this is a little bit of a, let's just say a shock beginning to kind of a new world, a long-term issue we have, and we may have other epidemics because of global warming. What advice do you have for your colleagues? What helped you most in the way you think about this?
Right. Well, let me start by saying, I think, one of the things that I learned here from the tremendous group of palliative care physicians, end-of-life people who specialize in the end of life, is that it's not giving up on people when you change the goals of care. It's focusing on the predominantly comfort and dignity as opposed to focusing on the medical. And that was my instinct and continues to be my instinct in everything I do here, that at some point that becomes the priority, again, based on patient preferences, family preferences, culture, and other religious things and other things. There was hard. There were very few people who had conversations about the end of life, especially the younger people. They had never, said to anyone, this is what I would want. And again, because of the uncertainty and the newness of all of it, it became really hard, I think, to extrapolate. I certainly know that if I'm dying of cancer or end-stage heart failure, I know what I would want. But with this disease, it was a little bit more complicated. And it's especially complicated because we can't connect with these families in the ways that we're all taught to, which is to sit down with them and face-to-face have a conversation about what's important to them, what's important to their loved one. What are the things that they had said that would make you think this is what they want or they wouldn't want? And how do we prioritize comfort and dignity versus longevity, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Mm. I think about this a lot because I study aging and health, and this word longevity, we hold it up to be, this is the goal. This is, let's live the longest we can. And we know so well, and we've seen so well, it is about quality of life, quality of living. No one wants to live, for years and years with suffering. And of course, this is just a dramatic microcosm of that, but that it does, to me, really force us to look at what we value now and appreciate it and really focus on each day. We all have unpredictability with different probabilities, but it is just the fragility of life all around us makes us, I think, really focus us in a good way on what matters. And one thing we will talk about next week is what you said, which is the goal was not to save patients. You went for your colleagues. You went to provide comfort and care and dignity. And that kind of flexibility in shifting goals, shifting what's meaning to you in this role now as a doctor with COVID patients, it's so important. That's what we all need to be doing. We can't continue life in full as it was before in many of our roles and professional roles. And that ability to say what's meaningful now is...
Yeah, I definitely wasn't able to offer a lot on the medical and science side. I was able to offer fresh legs, which is a term that one of my colleagues used. Like, basically, we're like the fresh legs who come on at the end of a game. So I was able to offer that. But then the other thing was a different perspective. I think one of the things that happened, especially around these end-of-life issues, was that the doctors who've been working there basically full bore, pedal to the metal since middle of March, were exhausted, and they were focusing very narrowly on problems and not thinking so much big picture. So I was able to kind of encourage us all to step back and say, what are we doing here? And let's think a little bit about where this is going and what's the likelihood this 89-year-old person with multiple medical problems is going to get out of the hospital. And maybe we should begin to try to have conversations with the family and give them permission to say it's okay to stop.
Yeah. Oh, I admire that work that you and your colleagues do. There's, it's a incredibly intense time for that type of leadership and stepping up and presence and compassion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you. Thank you to all the clinicians who are watching. And that will, I look forward to continuing this conversation in various ways, Ethan. This transitions us to, I'm going to just say what, Ethan said about kind of longevity and what's the goal here. My transition to Esther Perel will be us thinking about the epitaph. At the end of life, what is most important to people? It is not money. It is not how much you achieved. It is relationships. It is love. In those days in the hospital, it's all about the family. That's what matters. And so that brings us to the topic of the rest of our hour. Welcome, Esther. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello. Thank you for joining us over there in beautiful Woodstock.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you all.
So I want to, before we get into our dialogue, I want to introduce people to your background, your remarkable background. Esther is an internationally renowned psychotherapist who focuses on intimate relationships and work relationships. After decades of being a psychotherapist, she has brought this to the public as an educator through many venues. She has been teaching clinicians through sessions for CEU units. I had the pleasure of being on one of the session episodes last month where we got to talk about stress, my favorite topic, and COVID. And so so happy to now have you here to talk to us about relationships, which are the context really of social stress, the priorities that matter to us so much. So one thing we know about relationships is that when we look at the factors that stress out humans, what matters most is interpersonal stress. And what gets under the skin to cause all of this biological aging to be accelerated turns out to be feelings of being left, being rejected, having, stressful interpersonal conflict. These are what our body responds to and cares about most. And of course, financial and survival stress ranks high as well. So Esther is the producer and host of popular podcasts, Where Should We Begin?, where she does a 3-hour intensive session with families and couples and shares it publicly. It's phenomenally enlightening and educational. She also has a new podcast, How's Work? She grew up in Belgium, the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, and she's fluent in 9 languages. Her frank honesty, brilliance, insight, and her personal style make her completely accessible across cultures and ages. She is really one of the world's most insightful voices on the complexity of our modern relationships. So right now, she's been incredibly in demand. I think she's been on every major news outlet, New York Times, CNN, as well as Oprah and podcasts, just sharing so much right now what people need to hear. Social distancing has brought us to our homes where we experience maybe loneliness, or even if we're with partners, or an amplifier of interpersonal conflict, or in some cases, an amplifier of closeness. So of course it can go all ways, and this is what Esther has been helping people understand and talk about. I just want to say that when I watched the live dialogue, the interaction in Where Do We Begin, and she now has a new session on couples under lockdown, what I saw blew my mind, because I'm a researcher and I'm interested in the universals. What can we learn from your experience and people like you? And so we look at averages and we try to understand dynamics, and we've learned a lot about relationships and health, which we'll go into more. What Esther does is she is a researcher and more. So, being a clinician is both an art and a science, and she collects data so carefully in these intense sessions. She is listening, she's developing hypotheses, she's testing them out with the individuals and seeing if she's right, and then she's altering that, revising them, and coming up with more accurate hypotheses. And what happens next is magic, tears and aha moments, and all within hours. So I just want to comment on your skill at working with people live. And I also saw it, Esther and I and her husband Jack Salm I had the honor of meeting them this year, the month before COVID broke out in Costa Rica. We were both teaching, and we knew we would do something together. We didn't know what, but this is it.
I didn't imagine this. No.
So I saw people come forward and her do live work with people. And what's remarkable is that we see ourselves in other people so much. And so it's quite helpful. So we'll go through some situations that our audience, that you all brought to us in a bit. And first, we talk about stress a little bit. So I want to know, Esther, when you think about your work with people and relationships, where does mental health and physical health, how does it play a role? Because as you heard, what I see is that you are moving around some of the biggest determinants of our physical health when you're working with people and you're changing the level of conflict and intimacy. So tell me about how that fits into your model, or do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, I think about relational health. I actually will put it this way. You talked about how much the distress affects the health. I can reverse it. I can say my motto is generally that it's the quality of our relationships that will determine the quality of our lives. And this is true at work, and this is true at home. So when I look about relational health, which includes sexual health and emotional health, and that includes how people deal with problems or practicalities of life. It's the overall well-being of a relationship. I look at it in a direct line with what it does to our immune system, to our stress levels, to our cortisol levels, to our, I mean, basically to our motivation to stay alive, to fight the illness. Like, okay, I'm in pain, but at least I have a reason. But if I have zero reason, if all I've been wanting is to get away from you, what have I been doing here for the last 12 years? You think I'm going to want to, fight so much for my health. So it is so completely intertwined. I never break it down because for me, it is clearly so integrated in my head. And it's strange when it is not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who don't know, there is a gorgeous, solid literature for the past few decades by my colleagues like Jan Kiekult-Glaser and Ted Roglies, and they look at dyadic health. They look at couples, and we know that in the moment that when couples have a more conflictual relationship, when they have a stressful conversation, their reactivity is sky high, their inflammation is high. That relationship determines their stress response in the moment. And then when we look across time and we say, what predicts longevity? What sifts out to be some of the most important factors is quality of relationship. So what you just said, the quality of your relationship determines the quality of your life and how long you live, how well you live, health span, how long we live well. So that is just couldn't be emphasized enough. I live in Silicon Valley, and we are obsessed with biohacks to improve health, and pills and fasting, and guess what? It's right in front of us.
But I will add another piece to it. I would say when I think about quality of life or relational health, I am not only thinking free of symptoms. I'm not only thinking in hacking terms. I actually am much more phenomenological in this way. I'm also thinking in terms of meaning. I mean, motivation, quality, meaning, these things go also together. It's not just, it's not being sick is not yet the same as being healthy, but not being alive is not yet the same as having a quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that brings me to my next question. I want to understand what's between people more. You wrote a book, Mating in Captivity, Unlocking Erotic Intelligence. This was, is translated into 30 languages. I mean, this spoke to people across the world. And I want to understand more about erotic intelligence. Now, I've heard, from what I understand, and this is why we need to go deeper, it's not about sex, it's not about orgasms. This eroticism we all carry within and between. And before you answer, I want to tell you that we have been studying and talking about mindfulness in different ways throughout our 10-week webinar. And mindfulness is just a basic skill we need to have wellness, to know ourselves, to have awareness of what we're feeling. The products of mindfulness to me sound like some of the fundamentals of what you call erotic intelligence. So, but you're talking about it in a relational way between people. So when we talk about mindfulness and what you can experience, it is knowing yourself, your emotions, being in touch with your physical sensations. And so there's a sensory component. There's a sensual component of yoga and of these mind-body exercises that involve movement, but it's all within us. And so we think of mindfulness as, oh, this is just this individual thing that promotes wellness. And so tell us more about erotic wisdom and how you, how we can notice that in ourselves and use that.
So the shortest way to explain this to you is like that. You're absolutely right, that I am looking at it from a relational perspective, that I'm a systems-oriented family therapist. And then I have every other language, but this is my basic grammar. In mating in captivity, what I'm looking at is how individuals, relationships, or any living organism or system straddles the need for security with the need for adventure, the need for togetherness and the need for separateness, the need for commitment and the need for freedom. That duality, constantly, which we have basically inside of us from the moment we grow up. And as we come out of childhood, some of us are going to need more security and protection and safety, and some of us come out yearning for more space and independence and freedom. And of course, interestingly, we seem to mate with a person who is often on the other side. So how we straddle, how we reconcile these competing forces inside of us, but they are equally important. The force of love and the force of desire. The force that likes to know and the force that is curious about the unknown. The forces that like tradition and predictability and those who want mystery and exploration. It's that piece. Erotic intelligence was originally a word that actually Jack, so my husband, came up with as a spoof to emotional intelligence and moral intelligence. And it was a joke at first, but then it became a concept. And the concept began to make sense to me actually from looking at the work that I had done prior to that in the trauma field and my own childhood and community that I grew up with, which was that I observed that in the group of survivors that my parents were a part of, that were all Holocaust survivors, but I think you can extrapolate this to any other group. There were people who did not die and people who came back to life. And the people who did not die were tethered to the ground, constantly struggling with trust, with danger, with the unknown, and continuously wanting to protect themselves, only focused on security. And the people who did not die, basically people who knew how to keep themselves alive in the face of adversity, as we do now, had found an antidote to death. And that was the life force. They still thought that they needed security, but they didn't necessarily think that that was the only thing they wanted, and they didn't survive for nothing. And so these are people who understood eroticism as a force of aliveness, vibrancy, radiance, that thing. And that's why it is way beyond sexuality. It's actually the mystical sense of the word eroticism that I'm going for, long before modernity reduced it to mere sex.
Well, I got the chills when you talked about the aliveness in the Holocaust survivors. And
but it's also true now. You see, it's like one of the things people kept asking me in these last 10 weeks is, what can you celebrate in the midst of crisis? Can you continue to fall in love? Can you date? Can you have a birthday? Can you have a graduation? Yes, of course you do. What do you think these people did to stay alive all those years? Which is when I always ask my parents, what gave you the strength to wake up one more day and to want to continue? What did you think about? What did you hope for? What kept you alive?
Beautiful.
You know,
it fits in so well with the neurobiology of stress and threat, which keeps us in survival mode and not relationally oriented. We are much more self-oriented, much more prone to depression and anxiety, and that kind of threat mindset that, of course, we all felt, at least in this first, in February, is the survival response. And it really does prevent us from seeing, connecting, and being so relational. And when you describe the aspects of this erotic intelligence, this humor and playfulness and connectivity, that's the opposite of threat mind. I mean, that is a whole body experience. And I love that you've tied that into our ability to feel sexual. So when I've heard you talk about the question you ask people, tell us about that. I'll let you talk about that.
Which one?
When do you feel sexual? And it is when people feel integrated.
Right, but it actually, I ask, it's like, when do you feel most erotic? What do you do that awakens you? When do you feel most alive? And also, you can ask it in reverse. When do you find yourself most drawn to your partner? And the draw is not sexually attractive. The drawn is when you see a person who is radiant, who's in their element, who makes you laugh, who surprises you, who has been away, who you're yearning for. And it basically means that you are not in the emotional caretaking position of having to make them feel secure. When they're in their element, they don't need you. And if they don't need you, you can want them. And so you are constantly talking about the movement, the elan, that it is, feeling alive has to do with energy, and energy has to do with movement, and movement has to do with breath and blood flow. And that's where we join the mindfulness, the practice of it goes back to what you described, but the expression of it is what I am looking at, and the interplay of how two people co-regulate each other on that front.
Yes. Thank you so much. And forgive me for being so reductionistic. It is how I think. And it's so beautiful for you to take it out to, the expression of life. And I also just love the research that's emerging from Wendy Mendez and my other colleagues on this dyadic congruence in our physiology. I mean, we are influencing each other every moment in close relationships. And boy, is that happening now. So this brings me to my next question. You have talked about this, our title is From Conflict to Harmony. And there was an assumption behind that for many people, being sheltered in place is going to bring out more conflict, and that's not always the case. So for some people, they've found closeness, they've prioritized things, and the small things are not getting them. For others, it has enhanced conflict and differences. Maybe they want to separate after this. So what do you recommend that people, let's see, I've heard you talk about these polarities that we are on somewhere on the spectrum of needing space versus closeness and dependency, and our partner's somewhere on that spectrum, and we might not recognize those differences. And there's so many different unspoken ways that we're interacting with our partner that might be producing conflict or harmony that we can fine tune, that we can do better with. So what do you recommend? How might you guide our listeners in the conversation they might have with their partner, just even identifying where they are on these spectrums?
I would divide it in three things. So the first thing you're highlighting is that indeed, I think that disasters, and this is not my own research at all, disasters act as relationship accelerators. Why? Because they put mortality to the foreground. And once you think about mortality, you think life is short. And when you think life is short, the essence of things emerges for you. You start to rearrange your priorities. And your priorities are also your relational priorities. So either life is short, let's have a baby, let's make love, let's get married, let's move in. Or life is short, I've waited long enough. It's kind of, what am I waiting for versus I've waited long enough. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that we often look at the fact that there's a lot of babies and divorces after disasters. But there are a lot of people who come together and realize, I couldn't have done it without my partner. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm so thankful. I'm so appreciative. I realize how much you bring. I realize how much I need you. I realize what it would have been like to do all of this alone. Then you have, on the other side, two primary dances around this conflict. People have either felt that they were too close on top of each other, either they felt that they were too far apart, either away from each other as partners, either alone without partner. And this notion that we come out of our childhoods, many of us will complain or will lament either the things that we had too much of or too little of. I mean, there's about two general groups. You had too much closeness, too much invasion, intrusion, or you had neglect, or you had abandonment, or you had, distance. So it joins the original polarity, if you want. Now, when people are too much together or too far apart, in both cases, what really needs to happen in this moment is for couples, and this is the most important conflict of the moment, I think it's in generally so, polarization. Because we are in a period of prolonged uncertainty. When we were going into the first phase of risk assessment, or now in the risk tolerance phase, the fact is nobody really knows. It's exactly what Ethan was saying. We don't know enough. And when we don't know enough, it is typical inside a relationship that we're going to polarize. I want the kids to go out and play. They need to go see their friends. They've been so cooped up in the house for so long. What, you want to go out and play? We don't know with whom they're going to be playing. We don't know who else their parents have been seeing. This isn't safe. You don't want the kids to, you don't want to throw up all what we did these last 10 weeks as we were in confinement. What do you mean? You don't think the children care about their friendships? What, you don't care about their safety? You don't care about their socializing? This is polarization. Of course, both people care deeply about their socializing and deeply about their safety, but we split the ambivalence. And you become the flag bearer of half of the position of the dilemma, and I'll hold the other side of the dilemma. And this is the classic thing that is going on right now. From the beginning, this conflict has emerged around all different situations.
So
how do we not do it?
Yes. What do we do about that? So we're getting polarized. Our early, family patterns, childhood influences are probably helping explain that. But what should the conversation be? What would you assign to our audience as homework?
Yeah.
What should they discuss in the privacy of their bedroom tonight?
Look, the first thing that is really very, very powerful to do is switch roles. Switch roles for a second. Imagine that instead of having the position of, we don't want to put them at risk because you have asthma, etc., you actually talked in the position of your partner and you say, I feel so bad for little Johnny, who's been craving to see his friends. It's been so many weeks that he's home the whole time. Basically, because what happens in the polarization, everybody repeats the same thing over and over. If you actually speak the voice of the other, you get the opportunity of knowing how much you've actually been heard and how much the other one actually knows what you're saying. That's first. Then you say to the other, I know that it's not like you don't care about little Johnny being with friends or little Johnny being safe. I get it. And then you come close and you basically say, we both want both. Why are we fighting? Why are we turning on each other when we both care about the same thing? And then you say, that time when you did this, I really appreciated it. Not just that I appreciated what you did, but I appreciated what it said about who you are. You emphasize the quality of the person rather than just the task at hand. And slowly you start to remember that the person next to you is not your enemy. They actually are in this together with you. And then you say, this is scary. And they say, yeah, it's scary too. Or they say, you shouldn't be scared. And they say, but I am. And then you say, just let me be scared and hold me. There's nothing you can do about my fear anyway. And I won't dismiss yours and you won't dismiss me. And we'll make a relationship that has enough room for both of our coping styles to coexist.
Yeah, beautiful. That's fantastic. So there are going to be a lot of interesting conversations tonight.
And then let me know, people.
Yes. I want to read you one of our let's just say snippets that someone sent us. And, you've helped people in workplace relationships. What I see a lot is this, kind of hierarchy differences. One person, it's not always the man, has a big, powerful career. And there's this kind of hierarchy because of status. And how does that affect the relationship? So you've dealt with this before. I thought this was probably a common situation where job overflow is impacting the intimate relationship. So the quote is this: I'm the breadwinner in my family. I have a very demanding job as a leader, especially now in a medical system. I work very long hours. My partner does the majority of family management. It limits her in certain ways, like her career mobility. And this creates resentment to me and for me, guilt. I know I'm not alone. How do people deal with these types of work, status, power differentials in their intimate relationship?
Person X, the next time you come home late and your inclination is to apologize for having missed this, for having let your partner again do all the work and the bedtime and all of that, for not having shown up at something that was important. Instead of apologizing, start by thanking your partner and just really say, I thank you because I could only have stayed late at the job because I knew that you were here taking care of the other stuff. I couldn't do what I do without you. That is very different from, I'm sorry, I had a very important meeting and I'm so important and live with it. Versus, I'm not nearly that important. Your important is elevated. Your value is elevated because we are interdependent, and the complementarity between us is that I could not be there, not think about anything that goes on here because I know you are here doing it. That means I can only be what I am because of what you are and who you are. And now we are in this together. Look, it's not difficult. It's not easy to give up a career and to not be working in the same way and to let one person rise like that. But it makes a big difference if you feel constantly dismissed, pushed aside, and minimized, versus if you are continuously recognize that you are one of the central things that is making this possible. That's why people later on say, you didn't build this alone. We built this together. I was there every day supporting you to do this so that you could come home at 8:30 at night. So
that acknowledgement of the system, right? The system that's building and allowing the outside of the home work. I love that.
So, the career is yours only, and you are the one that is going out and doing this by yourself. It is not true. It's not the way this works.
And so when we notice ourselves saying sorry, that's the sign. Like, is that right? That we should always just be apologetic versus showing gratitude for the
I think
system.
The story is actually, I'm so important, please bear with me. Recognize my importance. No, you're not going home to ask somebody to recognize your importance. They already know it, first of all. You're going home to recognize their importance, because it is their importance that allows you to be carefree, completely invested in what you have to do without having to think about it for 2 minutes. And that freedom of worry, that trust that the rest is taken care of, that allows you to then do what you do so well at work, those are interdependent parts. You are part of a system. You are not doing this alone.
Beautiful. So this brings me to wanting to know what you see with older couples and with aging. What I know about aging, my parents are just such role models to us. They are still, they're in their 80s, and they have had that teamwork. My dad's career was my mom's career too. She did have her own career, but it was different and shorter. And they have prioritized their relationship throughout their, well, no, I'm not going to say that. There was a period when my father was absent when he was building his career. And what I know about aging is that as we get older, we prioritize relationships. We weed out relationships that don't feel supportive and don't make us feel good. So we have a smaller but more positive social network. And just the wisdom that comes with age about priorities and not more of the superficial things is something that on average is a lovely thing that happens with age. And so I am wondering if this question about, the power balance in couples, I mean, maybe that's an early career or a younger couple issue. What do you see in older couples? And I also want to, consider this, the ability to have and express erotic intelligence. Do you see that as more flowing in these happier older couples? Maybe you don't see the happier older couples.
I mean, the thing is that I may see happier older couples, but it's not clear that it's their first marriage, and neither their second. So I think that that's a piece that happens here, is that there is such an enormous amount of stress, especially in this country, where people basically, a marriage is often a social welfare state of two, where two people have to basically provide what an entire society and village should be providing for them. So by the time the pressure of the making it in the professional world has moved on, the relationship is often already dead on the vine. And then people come in with the renewed energy for the next relationship, where they finally say, now I want to really invest in the relationship. I spent my whole first 20 years just in my career. I didn't raise my first children. It's all of this thing. So this is not global. I think there are many parts of the world where relationships are central to people their entire life, where people are not only defined by work, where men have not only work as a place to assert themselves and to experience their sense of identity. I think there is variations around cultures about that. So it's not a given to say suddenly relationships become more important. Yes, the quality of relationships become more important in places where people get to choose them. In more family-oriented societies, you have to see your 17 cousins on the weekend, and it doesn't really matter which one you like or which one you don't like. You don't get to choose. So, we get the benefits of individualism and we get the liability of individualism.
Mm-hmm.
When you see couples in later life, who I consider this, erotic couples, what you see is that they still play. They have a lightness to them. They laugh. They can enjoy each other. They touch each other. They're sensual. In that sense, they have no age. They may have, at this point, I'm risk factor in age category. So aging at this point, I don't even know when it starts anymore. But 80-year-old of your parents, and in the hospital where Ethan was, I would not pass the triage, So, but when you see older, that is erotic, they are not older. And when you see younger, biologically younger, that is, agonizing, then they are not young. I think it's very important to not think of these distinctions between biological age and relational age or existential energy, if you want. When you see it, it is ageless. That's the thing that is so beautiful about it. It's like, wow, it transcends all the categories of biological age.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. I will be taking that to all of my colleagues at National Institute of Aging. This is where we discuss these issues. And, and they're just such biases about chronological age. And we use that so much. And it is so elastic and so fabricated.
It is curiosity, probably more than anything else. Curiosity, because it comes with exploration. It comes with discovery. It comes with leaning forward and being attentive. And still having wonder and still wanting to understand things versus this is the other position. You sit in the back of your seat and it is, you're relaxed, you're comfortable, but in the back of your seat, you hope that nothing new is going to happen. On the front of your seat, you still think that there's a lot of new things that can happen.
So I am wondering about when you became so prescient, so kind of this idea you have, not that you developed from years of experience about the importance of the open-minded, curious, playful way of being. And now we are faced with an uncertain long future, and our tendency is to be in threat mode, and the ability to be alive, like your hometown in Belgium, the people who chose living fully. I would love to understand, when you saw all this so clearly, was it after years of being a therapist, or was it really insights as you were growing up in this community of Holocaust survivors?
It's very interesting. I never thought about this until I wrote Mating in Captivity. And I was talking with Jack about his work with torture survivors. And asking him, when do you know that people are coming back to life? So they've been there in these solitary confinements, they come back. Can they laugh again? Can they take risks again? Because that means that you engage with the unknown. Can what happens? And as he was talking, I said, this is what I saw in Antwerp. And then I began to organize expressions and experiences that I had as a girl. I would go to certain homes where the curtain went always low. There was always a plastic on the couch. Everything was dim. You held yourself like this. The body was contracted. And then I would go to other houses that were, but I didn't interpret it. I just remembered knowing it. And then I had a reunion after 42 years with my classroom. And we all grew up together for 12 years in the same school, same class. So we knew each other's homes, families, the whole thing. And we began telling each other, I remember your house was like this, your house, and the abuse in this one, and the violence in that one, and the joy in this one. And people began to describe my parents, and that gave me a picture which resonated with mine. And I began to describe theirs. And basically, the kid had picked it all up, but didn't have a language to articulate it. When I began to write about what is desire, what is to own the wanting, what is that force, then I put the pieces together. That's kind of the way it went.
Yes. Yeah, that's That's helpful. That's beautiful. And I'm very excited to read the whole book. Now, you mentioned the torture survivors. If we had time, I would have loved to have brought in Jack Saul. And so Esther's husband is an expert on disaster mental health, and he has worked in many different types of disasters, such as 9/11. And the idea that he has been bringing to different institutions and communities is that of communal resilience. And so even though we don't have Jack, you and I can do this. We can address this. It's a very important point. There was CDC data that came out yesterday. That's you, not me. That was, I just think, demonstrated the point. We are experiencing communal trauma. The doubling of symptoms of depression, particularly among young adults. 1/3 of Americans are experiencing significant depression or anxiety. And so what do? In the medical model, we say, we need therapy, we need drugs, we need clinical treatment. This is a communal experience.
And I say we need mass mutual reliance.
Yes, tell us what that is.
It means that you reach out to people in every capacity you can. You create groups, you create gatherings, meaningful gatherings, not just to talk about your problem and your loneliness. Actually, survivors did this extremely well. They came together to celebrate this thing, to plant those trees. They had things for mourning and things for renaissance and regeneration. They really ritualized in both directions. I think it's the same here. If you feel lonely, you think we're going to think together of 1 or 2 people you can reach out to, people you once knew, people you're interested in, or you go to your neighbor who is alone and who can't go to the store, and you will start to help somebody. And when you help someone, you will feel needed, and you will instantly feel like you matter a lot more. The point of loneliness is also, and depression and anxiety is also, who cares about me? Who would notice? Do I matter? What reasons do I have to try harder to reach out and all of that? And
okay, so this is the core of, with our last 5 minutes, we have to talk about this loneliness, because it doesn't matter if you live with someone, if you're married, people feel lonely and in the midst of others. And your idea, this communal way of healing is, there's no doubt that that's what we need. There's no other solution. It has to be us having more genuine, authentic, intimate relationships with layers of people, not just those, who we live with, and really being supportive. But we have barriers. We have cultural barriers. You can say, go reach out. But I'm going to read you a quote from one of our audience members. I feel increased loneliness more now than ever, and I wish others would reach out. I wish people would call me, text me, and asking for help is something that's so hard for me to do. I don't want to bother other people. I know theoretically it's okay. Why is it so hard? I would appreciate your insight, Dr. Perel.
First of all, this is a country that believes that dependence is a dirty word. This is a country that values self-reliance, self-sufficiency, self-containment, autonomy. I ask everybody, are you raised for autonomy or are you raised for loyalty? Were you told to stand on your own 2 feet when you have a problem, deal with it yourself, nobody can help you as well as you can help yourself? Or were you told who can help you? Who is there for you? Who can you be there for? Were you brought up with a messaging around relationships that really says you are wired of, your sense of belonging is as important as your sense of autonomy, because we really need both. It's not either or. So to this person, I say, I know it's hard, but I'll promise you something. There is somebody else who, like you, is dying for somebody to reach out to them. And if you just do it once and you just say, what the heck? I'm tired of feeling this way. I'm just going to do something different from what I typically do. And you think of someone that you once met or that you haven't seen in a long time or that you used to know in college. It's amazing. In pandemic, people are reaching out to their circles of their whole life. It's not just whoever is around. That's one thing. I did a number of YouTube series now on loneliness, and people were together in the rooms. And then I saw from the chat rooms, people began to reach out to each other, because being alone is not the same as being lonely. Lonely in the midst of others is when you feel like you've become a function more than a person. Is when you feel that you are invisible, that people don't really care, that it doesn't matter what you do. That sense is even worse, because if I'm alone, I'm not relying on anyone. But if you're right here, like I see you, and I count on you, and you don't show up for me, that is just unbearable. That feeling is the loneliness in the midst of others. And in this moment of pandemic, the rules are a little bit changed. You actually can do things that you wouldn't normally do. You can say to 3 people, let's meet online. I have a friend, she just did this. I saw it. She just connected with 3 people. She said, can we have a little Zoom meeting online? And she brought us together, and she's the one reaching out. Then she said, can we do it again? But everybody said yes. Everybody said yes, because they would show up. They just are not taking the initiative.
Yeah.
And they
It's risk. We need to take risks. It's social risk. We hate rejection. We interpret everything as rejection. So I couldn't agree more. I think we must, be more vulnerable. I can feel alone. I have family. I have a child.
You don't have to think you're more vulnerable. You have to think that the other people are even more vulnerable than you.
That's right. Right. But my point was saying, even I feel lonely, and I don't look like I should. But I can feel, it's, so it is really important to realize that in our different circles, in our home, in our social circles, in our neighborhood, we have opportunities, and also in our institutions. And so I want to just ask all of our listeners, if there's one thing that you could change in your institution, start talking about it, because we do not have healthy medical institutions. We have ones that burn you out and treat you as if you're invulnerable. So we must start the change now before you go back and we don't have time to reflect, right? So we don't want to go back to the same situation. And then in your intimate relationships, I know enough from getting to hear, Esther, that when you ask yourself this, what is one thing you want to change about your close relationships, that the question comes back to you, right? Esther, what do you want to change about how you are presenting and interacting?
What's one thing you would like to do different? And pick a simple thing, and then just practice it, a small thing. You want to start a meeting at work, instead of, what are we doing? How about you start, how is everyone? What have you done this week to perk yourself up? What are some self-care things that you experience? Then you get 15 people who are telling you the great things that you could actually do as well.
Okay, so you said, how is everyone? We have to talk about this before we end. Such a loaded question. How are you? No, everyone wants to say fine, because, I should be grateful. I have a home. Maybe I still have a job. But you have a gorgeous your Facebook is the richest resource. So you have talked to us about how to complain well. Complaining opens up a ritual of actual deeper social connection and revealing what we care about. And boy, kvetching is not something that's okay in my family. Not that we don't do it, but your perspective on it showed so much that it's healthy, that if there's ever a time to kvetch, it's now, but there's a way to do it well. So tell us about that.
I mean, because I went to look at traditions of how did people deal with suffering. And usually we are inundated with messaging these days about gratitude. And in fact, there is a whole other tradition. They go together. It's not, but that is about complaining. I wrote this blog, The Art of Complaining. It just went totally viral, about the good juices of kvetching. Not to be in a cesspool of kvetching, but when you complain, there is humor. There is bonding that takes place. There is shared values, core values that people are relating to. And there is an acknowledgement of the pain without it being unbearable to listen to. And it gives a sense of control over the stuff that we can't control. And every culture has had a certain version of that. I happen to call it kvetching,
And you said it's like squeezing a lemon and making lemonade. I love that.
To take, and really, I thought it's so important to give people the permission to say it's hard. I hate it. I'm choking. I miss my friends. I want to go out. What's happened to my world? I was going to get married. I was going to go see my friend at her wedding, whatever it is, or his wedding. I think that bringing some balance into this, when things are hard, not feeling well is the normal feeling to have. It isn't called depression. It is the right response to the condition.
Mm-hmm. This is what we need to do. We need to reach out. We need to allow ourselves some complaining. And it's communal resilience. This is.
When we did the Facebook thing on complaining, and I said to people, what have you been complaining about? It's like the floodgates open and people poured their complaints. It felt so freeing. It was really amazing thing to watch.
I love it. So we are unfortunately out of time. I could talk to you for hours. It's such a pleasure and a joy. I love you so much, Esther. It's been a blessing to know you. And I will just mention what we're going to meet about next week. Our last webinar, I brought in some special guests. You'll hear from Liz Blackburn, my colleague and also a Nobel laureate, who will talk about the new way of doing science. We cannot go on in silos thinking about our company and our country. We need a vaccination. We need to work together. So she has a phenomenal model that you'll see. And so that's the first part. And then you're going to hear a dialogue with Eve Ekman, with Dan Siegel, and with Jack Cornfield, who you might be meeting for the first time, who is a teacher. He's a clinician, he's a psychotherapist, but really he's a teacher who has brought Buddhism to the West. And it's going to be a very interesting dialogue. I hope you join us then. Thank you so much. Have a good week.